Well, welcome to the next episode of the Christ-centered cosmic civilization, and we're still looking in at the fey creatures, the unseen earthly creatures that maybe they've all gone extinct, maybe they're still available to see or encounter under certain circumstances. Who knows? I'm not really necessarily speculating into that too much here, and you may find this whole topic just too weird, and you might think, I much preferred it when we were doing maths. Yeah, don't worry about that. Soon we'll be back going into music, and we'll have quite a few episodes on that, and that might be more to your taste. But for those of us who do enjoy taking all these ancient things that are in the Bible also quite seriously, as best as we can, this is what we're doing. So we've looked at the dragon and the satyr so far. Let's look at the griffin. Now, the griffin is mentioned in Leviticus 11:13 and Deuteronomy 14:12, both of which verses list the griffin as a creature that cannot be hunted for food. It's an unclean creature. You can't eat it. And so the implication is that people were doing that and eating them. And the Lord has to tell them not to do that because they are unclean creatures. They don't obey the law. They have weaponry on their appendages, as we'll see, and they touch dead things and should not be eaten. They are not like the clean creatures, of course, are those that are basically living the way that all creatures did in Eden, in a vegetarian way, that do not have weaponry built into their limbs. But the griffin does have that because it's understood to be a creature that was partly an eagle, and an eagle is an unclean creature, and partly a lion, an eagle and a lion, something that seems to be both of them. And a lion is also an unclean creature. But so far, that's manageable. But also the griffin was considered to have the ability to fly, usually with the ability to fly. But some ancient writers, for them, they said the griffin didn't. They'd encountered griffins that didn't have flight. Now, it could be just a earthly creature. It may not be a fey creature at all. It can be just an earthly creature, some large bird that has aspects of a lion about it. It could be that. Something really, a much larger bird than birds we have around today, but that it has the appearance of some parts of it as a lion. But the way it is depicted in statues, stonework particularly, going back very, very long time, and in many different parts of the world, you see that the griffin. So again, it's not quite as universal as a dragon, but it's something that is very well known. Like in 43 AD, Pomponius wrote about a region of Europe, possibly Ukraine, or the ancient lands of the Scythians. And Pomponius says this: it's a region of very rich soil. So this is why it could easily be Ukraine. A region of very rich soil, but quite uninhabitable because griffins, a savage and tenacious breed of wild beasts, love the gold that is mined from deep within the earth there. And because they guard it with an amazing hostility to those who set foot there. So that's a fascinating detail about griffins, that they have a love of gold. So I think that there's birds that are like that, aren't there? Magpies, they collect shiny things and keep them in a nest. And so presumably the griffin is somewhat like that. The Russians or Ukrainians, whichever part, or Scythians perhaps, were mining gold, but these griffins flying and the large creature would see the gold and come and obtain it and then perhaps take it back to if they had nests or dens or whatever it is, and guard it with amazing hostility. Now, in artwork, the stonework where they're depicted, the griffin has a kingly or noble quality to it, and some ancients describe it as the king of all creatures. Presumably that, because if the lion is like a king of the beast, and then this is a flying lion, then I guess it's the king of all creatures then by that logic. So you do get depictions of griffins in stonework that go back to Egypt, and many of us can think of those. And Iran, ancient Iran, Persia, over 3,000 years ago, so back to 1000 BC or earlier, stonework depictions of griffins. Now, Isidore of Seville, he's really one of my absolute favourite people in church history, because he's just before you get that Islamic invasion, a brutal invasion of Spain and the total destruction of Christian culture, this incredibly, such an amazing civilization, and it is obliterated by the Islamic invasion. We'll do an episode about that, the history and the problems of Andalusia as the Islamic concept of that. But for Isidore is just before all that tragedy happens. And he would, if he was around today, we'd certainly have him as a guest on the Christ-centered Cosmic Civilization, because he had that. He was attempting to describe that, the Christ-centered Cosmic Civilization, in his kind of encyclopedia. And he's trying to just describe everything in the universe, that earthly, fey creatures, everything. One of the greatest experts on the fey creatures and on nearly everything, Isidore was compiling so much earlier knowledge into that glorious encyclopedia in the 7th century. And this is what he says about griffins. He says the griffs are so called because they are winged quadrupeds. So they're 4 legs, like most birds, I suppose, just have 2 legs, but this is a flying creature with 4 legs. The griffs are so called because they are winged quadrupeds. This kind of wild beast is found in the Hyperborean mountains. So again, it is the Scythian realm that he's aware of them. But of course, we've seen like the Egyptians knew them and the Persians knew them. Anyway, Isidore goes on. In every part of their body, they are lions, and in wings and heads are like eagles, and they are fierce enemies of horses. Moreover, they tear human beings to pieces. So that's, as typical of Isidore, he gives you just that little bit more precision than others do. He's very careful like that. And so it's like their entire body is lion-like, and only the wings and the head is like an eagle. So he narrows it down quite specifically to that. But there's an interesting detail: fierce enemies of horses. That's their preferred diet, presumably, and they'll swoop down to get horses. Well, there's the griffin. Leviticus 11:13, Deuteronomy 14:12. I'm not aware of griffins being still around in the world. And they're probably not a fey creature, are they really? They were probably just an earthly creature that is now extinct. Now we'll come to a creature that is more unusual, called the cockatrice or basilisk. And this is odd. There's two names. There's two names for it, and some people think they may be separate beasts, but I think they're the same thing. A small dragon-like creature with a head like a cockerel, usually with wings. So again, many of these, what we would now call mythological creatures or fey creatures, they are creatures that had an appearance that gave people the idea that they were a part one animal and part another animal. So in this case, it's like something, mixing something of the dragon and something of like a fowl, like maybe a chicken or something like that. I think they're sometimes known as wyverns. Shakespeare mentions them, I think, multiple times. He mentions them in Richard III when he says that a cockatrice has an eye which, if you do not avoid its gaze, you die. That's in Richard III, the cockatrice. An unavoided eye is murderous of the cockatrice. And then in Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare mentions, again similarly, the death-darting eye of cockatrice. So there's something, he takes the view, and this is something that is quite often mentioned, that there's something about this creature so that if it gazes directly at it and you meet its gaze, you will die. Why you will die, it's not so obvious. Is it there's something about its appearance that is so terrifying that you kind of are frightened to death? Or is it that this is not an earth creature, but this is genuinely one of these fey creatures that has powers and has some sort of a kind of devilish power to kill simply with its gaze? That isn't specified. But that idea that the basilisk, the basilisk is more like a lizard, but has this power of gazing to kill, and the cockatrice is more like a lizard, like a dragon thing, but very much with the wings and the head of more like a chicken sort of thing. So, but in Harry Potter mythology, the basilisk it does occur, and does have this ability to kill with its gaze. Quite interesting, I looked into it's quite interesting if you look at these creatures in medieval bestiaries. And there, a very unusual detail about it is the weasel is immune to the gaze of the basilisk or the cockatrice. So I don't know why that is. Is it just that it's very quick and doesn't get caught in its gaze and doesn't stare at it or something? I'm not sure. Where is it in the Bible? Yeah, Isaiah 11. There's 3 occurrences of this creature in Isaiah. Isaiah 11, verse 8. Isaiah 14, verse 29. And Isaiah 59, verse 5. Isaiah 59, verse 5, I have that here. In each of these examples, he's giving examples of different creatures. So Isaiah 11:8, Isaiah 14:29, Isaiah 59:5. Jeremiah mentions them in Jeremiah 8:17, and finally Proverbs 23:32. But in order to see that they are in those verses, you'll need to dig out a King James version of the Bible or the old Septuagint. Just one more thing about these strange creatures. Pliny, the Roman writer, Pliny the Elder, in his natural history book from 79 AD, he wrote, I'll quote from that, he says, here we are, "The basilisk sends all snakes running with its hiss." So it has a way that it is somehow connected to serpents or snakes, but that it kind of rules over them, and it makes a hissing sound, and all the snakes run away. But he carries on. Pliny says, it does not move like a snake by coiling its body, but rather moves directly forward with its middle raised high. It burns up vegetation not only with its touch, but also with its breath, which can scorch grass and burst rocks. Its effect on all other animals is terrible. So there, Pliny, he talks as if he's seen this creature, and he describes it very much as something that has, is it, I guess, fire breathing there, or something like that. Maybe it's a different kind of breath, but the effect of it is to scorch the grass. And it can even destroy rocks. I don't know with its, probably with its breath there, he's suggesting. Now, another creature, the phoenix. The phoenix, I think, is only mentioned once in the Bible, and that's in Job 29, verse 18. And it says there, I shall die with my nest and shall multiply my days as the phoenix. So the idea there is being able to extend your life as a phoenix can. The phoenix, this is another kind of bird that has a kind of, has a power to it, something special about it that means it can carry on living indefinitely. And again, this is a creature that's mentioned all over the world. This is not just something that occurs only in the Bible. It's in ancient Chinese writings, Persian, Russian stories refer to this amazing, flying, beautiful bird that has basically endless life. When there's a commentary series by Kyle and Delitzsch on the Old Testament, and in their commentary on Job 29:18, they insist that what is being referred to is the phoenix. I mention that because sometimes people get nervous that the Bible mentions these, what we would call mythological creatures, and they try to translate these things as something more mundane, and they'll just say, oh, let's just call that like a buffalo, and let's call that an eagle, and let's call that a donkey or whatever. Let's just translate it as something quite mundane. But I can understand why people do that, because in their worldview, the world might not be a particularly interesting place, and they're like, I don't believe there have ever been wonderful creatures like this, and I certainly don't think they are now, and so let's translate that as something quite ordinary. But Kyle and Delitzsch, in this is, I'll quote from them, their commentary on Job 29:18-20, they say, that this bird is none other than the phoenix is put beyond all doubt by, and then they refer to Jewish commentaries on it, and then they quote this, on the contrary, we must immediately welcome a reference to the Arab and Egyptian myth of the phoenix that can be proved in a book which otherwise blends things Egyptian and Arabic. So they are quite insistent that we translate this as the phoenix, and they believe such a creature did in fact exist. Clement, he's a Christian writer from around the year 100, Clement of Rome. He's someone who's mentioned in the New Testament, Clement of Rome. Around the year 100, he refers to the phoenix in his commentary on 1 Corinthians 15. I'll quote this in its entirety because it gives us quite a lot of detail about the phoenix, and it saves us because other people say similar things about the phoenix, but I think Clement says it most thoroughly. We'll also have a bit of what Tertullian says in a moment, but Clement of Rome, this is what he says about the phoenix. He says, let us consider that wonderful sign of the resurrection which takes place in eastern lands, in Arabia and the countries round about. There is a certain bird which is called a phoenix. It's the only one of its kind and lives 500 years. Let me just make a quick note on that. He thinks there's only one single phoenix. And it dies and is... we'll come to what happens to it in a moment. But other writers believe there are many of them, or not many, but some of them, and not just one. But it could be that Clement, when he went to Egypt to see this event occur, he saw it and presumably was told that this only happens once every 500 years. And he presumes that there's only one of these creatures, but others seem to suggest there's more than one. Anyway, I'll carry on reading from Clement. When the time of its death draws near, that it must die, the phoenix builds itself a nest, using frankincense and myrrh and other spices, into which, when the time is fulfilled, it enters and dies. But as its flesh decays, a certain kind of almost like a worm is produced, which is nourished by the juices of the dead bird, and it bursts forth feathers. Then, when it has acquired strength, it takes up that nest, in which are its former bones, and carries these from the land of Arabia into Egypt to the city called Heliopolis. And in broad daylight, flying in the sight of all people, it places those bones on the altar of the sun, S-U-N, at Heliopolis, a city dedicated to the worship of the sun. And having done this, it goes back to where it was formerly living. The priests then inspect the registers of the dates in their ancient books and find that the bird has returned exactly as the 500th year was completed. So what's fascinating about all that Clement says there is not only is it that the bird always comes back to this same location in Heliopolis at this altar to the sun, but that there were priests who maintained registers of the phoenixes, or even if it was the only one that's ever existed, that one phoenix, and they retain these registers over 500-year periods to note what happens to it. Now, some have said that the phoenix returned not so much to Arabia but to Socotra. And some have claimed that they'd seen this phoenix even up until the 19th century. But in the 19th century, Socotra, which had been a Christian civilization, this small island Christian civilization, that Christian civilization was completely wiped out by Islamists in the 19th century. And since then, nobody claims that there is such a thing as a phoenix anymore. And Tertullian, he's a 2nd century church leader from North Africa, and he also refers to the phoenix in his book on resurrection. Let me quote from him too, it's fascinating him as well. He says that a most complete and unarguable symbol of our resurrection hope is this animated being, which is relevant alike to life and death. I refer to the bird, which is peculiar to the East, famous for its unique existence, marvellous from its posthumous life, because it renews its life in a voluntary death. Its dying day is its birthday, for on that day it both departs and returns. Once more a phoenix, where just now there was none. Once more himself, but just now out of existence. Another, yet the same. So Tertullian is giving us in kind of poetic language what Clement gave in kind of a more careful, factual, descriptive way. Tertullian is quite poetic, isn't he? I'll read that bit just where he says, once it departs and returns, where once was a phoenix, now there's none. Once more himself, but just now out of existence. Another yet the same. Anyway, he goes on. What can be more express and significant for our subject of the resurrection than this? God, even in his own scripture, refers to this, how the righteous shall flourish like the phoenix, that it shall flourish or revive from death and the grave, to teach us to believe that there is resurrection beyond death, even when the body has been burned. Our Lord has declared that we are worth more than many sparrows. Well, maybe better than many phoenixes too. But men must die once for all, while the phoenix in Arabia is sure of a resurrection. Fascinating that Tertullian says that. There's actually quite a lot of quotations about the phoenix. Rufinus says it. There's a great quote from Rufinus Eusebius. He has a small version of what we had from Clement. Cyril of Jerusalem in the 4th century describes the phoenix making this burial cocoon of frankincense, myrrh, and other spices, and entering this little coffin and going through this process, as Clement said. Cyril sort of goes into it a little bit more and says that the living God gave this creature to the world to reassure us that resurrection is a reality. Jewish legends say that the phoenix was the only creature that refused to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and therefore it was granted this form of immortality. I've not seen that written anywhere other than just quoted, so I don't know. Let's just move on to do the unicorn, if we can. We'll just kind of briefly handle this idea of the unicorn. In the Septuagint, the word used is like the single-horned creature. The original word is quite often translated in modern Bibles as just wild ox. A wild ox. But the problem with translating it as a wild ox does not have a single horn. So the only feature of it that's captured in its name, the single horn, and we put it as the unicorn, you cannot translate it as wild ox because a wild ox doesn't have a single horn. It's mentioned several times in the Bible. I'll just give the references and you can look them up yourself. Numbers 23:22, Numbers 24:8, Deuteronomy 33:17, Psalms 22 verse 22, Psalm 29 verse 6, and Psalm 92:11, and also Isaiah 34 verse 7. There's one more reference that I particularly like, and it's a favourite in our home, particularly at Christmas time, and it's Job 39 verses 9 to 10. And the Lord asks that, can you cause the unicorn to stay by your manger? Now, that's a fascinating thing, isn't it? What can Job get a unicorn to stay by his manger? Why is the Lord asking such a thing? Like, why does the Lord think about having a unicorn next to a manger? But of course, we are immediately thrilled by that statement because we know that at the incarnation, at his birth, the Lord would be in a manger. And the relevance of who is round that manger is actually amazing. And so Job 39, 9 to 10, we take that to mean that not only was the manger surrounded by sheep and cattle, but there was at least one unicorn present. Some would say can the unicorn fly? That is technically a Pegasus. It's not the same as a unicorn. A unicorn, though, if you look up those scriptures, the assumption is that the unicorn is an immensely strong creature. immensely strong creature. And the Lord, it says, the Lord is stronger than a unicorn. So that is, we have to think that the unicorn has some great strength within it, some power within it. There's all sorts of myths about unicorns, and that their blood is of a special character and their horn has special power. I think the Danish monarchy, their throne has a unicorn horn in it, the Danish monarchy. So right down to the modern day, there is a unicorn horn used in the Danish monarchy. Yeah, maybe that's all that we'll say about the unicorn. We'll just end this portion of our studies of these kind of strange creatures that are mentioned in the Bible with two that are not really like any other and may not even be relevant, but I'll mention them because you might be thinking about them. There's Leviathan and Behemoth. So Leviathan is a sea creature, a mighty, unique sea creature, and Behemoth is a mighty land-based creature, again, unique. Both of these seem to be probably belong to the unseen realm. They're mentioned, that Leviathan is mentioned in Psalm 104 verse 4, Job 41 verses 1 to 3, Psalm 74 13 to 15, and Isaiah 27 1 to 3. Behemoth is mentioned just in Job 40 verses 15 to 24. Now, these are, there's like so it's a massive creature of the sea and a massive creature of the land, and they possibly belong to the unseen creation and possibly are angelic in species, sort of, because they seem to play a major role in Revelation and also perhaps in Daniel, also maybe Daniel 7, these large creatures. In Revelation, let me read this. Revelation 13, verse 1, John writes, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So it's a huge sea creature that arises there. And then in Revelation 13:22, he says, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spake like a dragon. So I'm not sure these belong to the same category as the others, because they have they seem to belong to the angelic realm, but really, or certainly are powers or principalities that Jesus created, and that now seem to be controlled by the devil. So the mighty, possibly angelic beasts that have come under the control of Satan, even if they were originally created to have a more positive administrative role over the land and the sea. Well, that's perhaps all. We'll draw our, things to a close there, and in our next episode, we could perhaps have a little think about 1 or 2 more things about these kind of mythological creatures or the fey creatures in church history, and then we'll go on to think about music.